Hello again and welcome back to Failure and Analysis. I'm Kevin Jordan and we're at Clubhouse, another Clubhouse chat where we're talking about the war on toxic communities, I guess. I don't want to say gamers, but toxic communities. Anyway, it should be really interesting. I have a ton to say, but I want to hear what the other people have to say as well. So, hope you enjoy it, and let's join the channel.
What up, Kevin?
Well, hello.
Hello.
What's cracking?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
How you doing?
Not sure if Candace is joining us today.
Okay.
She got her second COVID shot, so she's
Right.
having some side effects. So.
Right.
She said she's good.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. And there we go.
What's up?
Oh
Hey, hope you're
my
feeling
God, it's happening.
It's Wednesday already.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Yeah. I'm
Crazy.
Excited for today's topic though, because.
Yeah, so I meant to read your blog, and then I got my second COVID shot, and I was knocked on my ass for 2 days. So if you get a minute, can you like TLDR some bullet points from that? Because it seemed pretty good.
Yeah, it would be my pleasure. Yeah. So
Should we just kick it off with that?
Yeah, sounds perfect.
Sure. Yeah. So really kind of the thesis, or kind of really what I was saying in the post is just, there's this idea that there's this big problem right now with players in online multiplayer, skill-based competitive games with toxicity, right? Players join a match and they're quote-unquote toxic with each other, which the definition of toxic is being, misogynistic or racist or, just dicks, or like calling them, because it's rude to the other players, right? We all are familiar with this sort of scenario, right? And but where does this come from? What is the solutions to it? How are the solutions going that the studios are doing, right? Like common ones are they mute players automatically if players report them in a match, or they can global mute the player so that no one can hear them on the team. They may filter off certain words. If you say certain words, you may be automatically kicked out, so on and so forth. And kind of the idea that I was talking about in the post is that, I think a lot of views on toxicity are a bit misguided because it's putting a lot of the onus on players when a lot of it comes from sort of the science of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to put players together in a match who don't know each other, and we're all trying to increase their rating, let's say they're playing Rocket League or Valorant or Overwatch, and all you're trying to do is get from gold to platinum, and your team is screwed up. Maybe they're having an off day, maybe they're just not playing very well, or maybe they're playing the hero that you usually play, or whatever it is. These are all kind of situations that designers putting players into that that can breed the toxicity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of similar to how, say, a lot of people complain about Facebook creating an environment where people can be toxic or spread fake news and stuff like that. People don't really blame individual people on Facebook solely. They also blame Facebook the platform for not moderating it, for not, doing anything to make sure that the content isn't filtered or whatever, right? And so I think in the same vein, we should also think about, as designers, the way that we're creating these systems and games and these things in the game and trying to reduce toxicity in that way, right? And so I just kind of go through some of the examples and things that I'm thinking about in terms of how to create games from the beginning so that you don't put the player in these situations as much.
And the theory there is that if players don't have as much of an opportunity or a reason to be toxic, then in general the game will be less toxic, or that people will be less toxic in the game?
Yeah, for example, let's say, well, for example, I was talking, so it was interesting after I read the article, a lot of people reached out to me, called me, and wanted to talk about it, doing work in the industry and stuff. And, one example someone gave me was just like, think about Tinder, right? When you go on Tinder, you match with people, someone likes you, you like them, you match them or whatever. Then you have to have a conversation with them. You have to suss out whether you want to go on a date with them and stuff. You don't go on there and just say, okay, your date's going to be at Chipotle at 5 p.m. tomorrow. That would streamline things a lot. You can get dates faster and all these things. But the experience is not as good, right? And so what happens with matchmaking games today is that you just hit a button, it matches you, puts you to a match, and now you're in a situation where you don't know this person, you may not have the same sort of goals. One person may be playing just to chill out, the other person may be just really want to win, and so these sort of things contribute in, games like I was saying, Valorant or Overwatch or WoW. It's just that you're just kind of thrown in the match with people that you just don't know, and all these things can contribute to possibly causing the game to go toxic, right? Or players to be toxic.
Yeah, that's right. And I do think...
Hey, Kevin, just before you get into it...
Yeah.
Chris, if you want to fiddle with your mic or your audio settings a little bit, it's kind of like warbling or kind of cutting in and out. You can maybe troubleshoot it a little bit while Kevin's going on.
So I have a ton to say about this, more than an hour. I'll try to keep it succinct so everyone else can, because I'm really curious what you guys think. But I do think there's a huge role that design can play in limiting toxicity. And then, regardless of anything you might do, there's going to be toxic elements of your community, and so there should be a policed side of it as well. But I think one of the biggest issues, I think, is, and this is particularly true of games that are struggling to achieve critical mass in their community, especially in matchmaking environments. The number one priority seems to be making sure queue times are as low as possible. And I think that causes the potential for a lot more toxicity than would otherwise be created if they cared about the experience more and then found out where the queue times were rather than the other way around. Get the queue times as low as possible and then see where the game experience is at. So I think the priority has traditionally been we just need to get queue times as low as possible. And of course players appreciate that, but the sacrifices made along the way can be really detrimental. And I have an example if you guys want to hear that, or if anyone else wants to chime in.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go.
So World of Warcraft, right, is a great example of this. We used to have, groups took a long time to form, right? And that's essentially a queue time, right? And it could take 45 minutes to an hour to run a dungeon, to get a group together to run a dungeon. So by the time the group formed, people held on to it for dear life, right? Because they really wanted to get the dungeon run completed. And so you'd put up with a lot more. You'd be a lot nicer to people, a lot more supportive, a lot more constructive with your criticism, because the cost of that group breaking apart, either because they kicked you or you ended up kicking somebody that you didn't like, was huge. It meant you'd have to wait another huge amount of time before you could take another run at the dungeon. Over time, the queue times went really got a lot faster, down to sub 5 minutes with cross-server everything. And now the cost of kicking someone or being kicked is much, much shorter, so people don't have that sense of investment. And also because the pool size of the community is much larger, reputation is also out the window. You don't have to worry about the long term. And in the case where 45 minutes to an hour, not only do you have the goal of just completing that dungeon, but you also have the long-term goal of, I want to form more permanent social connections because then me and 4 other people that play all at the same time and have similar goals and attitudes, we can just run dungeons as often as we want, and that's the dream, right? And so there's a long-term goal there as well, to be really socially, like a good citizen sort of thing. And so somewhere between those 2 points of really fast queues with people you're never going to see again and no real incentive not to be a dick, and really long queues where it takes a super long time to get any fun in, but you're really invested. Somewhere between those 2 points is where this kind of magic is happening, where people are being less toxic and becoming better citizens. And so I'd love to see games in the future try to figure out where the sweet spot is between those 2 points, because obviously people want short queues, but they also want a good experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has their own goals too, and not everybody wants to play, and the game is different. It depends on what the game is, right? If you're playing League of Legends, I don't know necessarily everybody really cares. It depends on what the goals of the game are too. Is the goal of to really connect with people and find a community, right, and things like that? I'm sure people have, right? But I think a lot of people play that game maybe just to like get in, have a good game, and get out. You know?
Sure.
And so.
And I have a good example of League of Legends putting this in action, which I was really impressed by. It's the same sort of philosophy though, of like putting design into making the experience better, but at the cost of queue times. Because it used to be, I want to play a game, you click the button, you get thrown in with 5 other random people or 4 other random people. Immediately you see mid or feed, because everybody wants to play mid, right? And it becomes a fight immediately, right? And before you've even started the game, you have these conflicts, and they lead to one person getting the mid, the other person having to play a character they may not know, or a role they may not be really proficient with, which leads them to playing badly, plus they're salty, and so they don't put as much effort into it, and then the whole team sort of breaks down. And so one of the things they did, which I thought was brilliant, was let people pick their role ahead of time. And so now you select that I want to play mid, and you accept the consequence of it's going to take me longer to find a game, but once I finally do, I'm going to be able to play as mid, which is what I want. And everyone else in there is also playing the role they theoretically want. And so and they're okay with it. And it seemed like that was a pretty popular option. And it just took a little bit of design to say, well, I think people are willing to sacrifice some of their time for a better chance at a good experience. And that's what I think it comes down to. I think if given the opportunity, players are pretty okay with that contract. If you give them the 2 choices of, you can get in really fast, but the chances are low that you're going to have a good experience, or you can spend a little bit more time and increase the chances dramatically of a good experience, they'll usually go for that second option.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I mean, many games have role queue. Like WoW has role queue now, right? Mm-hmm. Just like you want to queue as a healer or a tank, and your queue is usually faster. So it does do some good work as well as kind of, making that experience for the healer easier, just to encourage more people to play healers and things like that. But as you mentioned, now the DPS feels like, why is the queue so long for me or whatever? Right? Yeah. But I agree that it's a superior design though. Like even Overwatch added role queue as well, reluctantly.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, because there's a lot of issues with role queue as well as I guess it's unique for Overwatch just because the original vision was that people switch heroes all the time. It may go from a 2 healer team to a 1 healer team.
Yeah, like the meta isn't solid, right?
But the way that players play the game didn't really turn out that way. People actually like playing roles. Like people identify as a role. Yeah. There are people who shift between roles, like non-binary roles, I suppose you could say. But like that's kind of rarer. Most people kind of have a certain type of hero they like to play, a certain type of role they like to play, and so they kind of really fought with the players' sort of psychology there, I suppose you could say.
Right. But yeah, just again the basic concept of put some design into it. We haven't come to the end of the list of ideas that can improve, matchmaking and what happens when people, bump into each other, and how does game design dictate how they're going to react. Sorry, go ahead, Candace.
Oh, I was just going to lay some baseline. So it sounds like what we're trying to assess here is a game that lets communities form, like WoW and Overwatch. Like there will be emergent communities that form themselves in these games.
Mm-hmm.
But then also we're evaluating how the matchmaking space in these kind of games will lead to player toxicity, and we're mostly assuming it's because people don't know each other, don't like each other, and actively at odds with each other in these contexts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a broad topic. It's all different things, right?
Yeah.
One is is toxicity in games a solvable? Like, for example, solo queue ranked in, say, League or whatever. Is it just really? It could be solved with some sort of system that they haven't thought of yet, and it's not really kind of. You don't have to change the design. Solo queue ranked is fine. It's just really they haven't figured out the right system yet to address it. Or is it really a deeper issue that just it's essentially, if you're going to make a solo queue ranked sort of game, you have to accept a certain level of toxicity. You have to, right? What kind of thinking, what kind of way to think about it between those two views, I suppose. And the other is kind of, if there is a system that could just address it that we haven't thought of, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
And because I had, someone called me and they're like, it's unfair to say that you have to throw out the whole design of having solo queue ranks in games. There should be a solution to it. Instead come up with solutions to it. And in some ways, I think that might just be sort of fraught. Is there really a silver bullet to that? I just don't think there is.
Yeah,
no,
that's certainly
not a silver bullet. I think that it's right to say that very important to solving, or not necessarily solving, but combating player toxicity, especially in the context of playing with complete strangers, is to definitely intuit where those pressure points are going to be. Like where are people relying on each other? How often are they relying on each other? To what extent are they relying on each other? What are the stakes? Right? How much time is lost if a player is bad or feeds or does whatever? But I think that's only like one side of the tetrahedron dice of figuring out how to solve, like, logistically people being good to each other. And shit, if governments could figure that out, damn. But I think also equally important that is often overlooked or neglected is the flip side of the coin, where at every like aspect of your game, at every bit of content that you have that puts players together or incentivize players to be together, you have to both evaluate, one, how can they be bad to each other, which I think games are pretty good at intuiting at this point, given that there is like a wealth of 15 years of watching people be bad to each other. But I think what people often neglect is giving players an opportunity for great benevolence and to be good to somebody else, and that being good to somebody else has to be insanely easy. It has to be just as easy or easier than being bad to somebody, right? Whereas like your opportunity for benevolence in a League of Legends game or like a World of Warcraft dungeon is, well, I must be very nice to 4 other people for the next 45 minutes to 1.5 hours, depending on how good this group is.
Right.
And that is so much harder than flipping somebody off, calling them a slur, and then leaving the group and hoping that your next group is just as easy, right?
Yeah.
And
the reward is also part of that as well. Make it easy and rewarding.
Right. And so I mentioned before that it was important that the games both have like emergent, like self-filtering communities as well as match-made communities, because I feel like similar to the streamer atmosphere actually on Twitch, there are people who want to like be a leader in their communities. You know, you want to be the Twitch streamer and you want to have the followers that watch you, but you want to make sure that your followers aren't dicks. And so you impose some rules in your chat, and almost every streamer has different rules in their chat, and they'll have different moderators. And I think it's also about giving people the tools to make those communities, and then rewarding people for being those kind of community leaders, so that there are a lot of communities that are forming that feel good to be part of, that people can identify with, that people want to be in, and then they play games with the people that they want to play with. And then also they have these incredible opportunities to be benevolent to one another or to be benevolent to another group. And I think that like that is a side that is often neglected in video games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something I thought of when you're talking, Candace, is Dota has this one feature where I think they only do this during the International, during the Battle Pass, or maybe it's just always, but you could basically use this consumable that buffs your sort of currency game, but it buffs the entire parties.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of is like this little moment where everyone's like, oh, thanks, cool dude, you know? And it kind of adds to this sort of pro-social sort of like incentive to the group, right? And I always thought that was really kind of smart.
Yeah, I like that.
Valve's always ahead of the curve on this kind of shit. I feel like, having to develop Dota 2, like, that's ground zero for trying to wrangle a toxic community. And so I thought a lot of their initiatives worked pretty well. I thought revealing that if you got enough reports, you would effectively be shadow banned and condemned to a pool of, like, other just troll-faced shitters that you could only play with and you wouldn't be able to get out of them, was, like, a pretty good disincentive to being an asshole. And I think they were the first system that, would send you a follow-up message to let you know that they had taken action on somebody's account thanks to one of your votes. I thought that, like, I don't know, that always made me feel really good because I was getting a kind of little micro notification and this feeling of sort of an achievement for, popping up days later. It made me feel like reporting somebody did have an effect, and maybe I'm saving somebody else from them being a jerk. And that sense of, like, moderation mechanisms with teeth, I think really made me think more carefully about being an asshole in it, because you get the sense that, like, they could work, and also I can't exactly be reporting people and then being a jerk 2 games later. Like, the dissonance is huge there.
That's exactly what I wanted to outline. Do you see all these systems that people build to counter toxicity? Like the banning system, where if enough people they vote against you, then you get a ban. And then they also tell everybody, they telegraph to everybody else there was a reward. Thank you for reporting this person. They got a ban as a result of your action, to kind of like reinforce the fact that like bad people have bad things happen to them. So now imagine taking every system that does something like that, and then also, not in lieu of, but also making the positive version of that, where like you give somebody an upvote and then later you get to find out that they bought a fucking mount with your upvote points or something. Like, why does nobody do this?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, to touch on something you mentioned, Luca, so the thing about like doing a low priority queue, or what Riot called, I don't know if this is the colloquial term, but Prisoner's Island, essentially, where basically all the people who are toxic queue with other toxic people. I don't know, I've never seen like the data in that system, but I'm skeptical that it was really successful. And I know Riot publicly spoke about it at one point, saying that it didn't really work out, or they didn't think it's a good system. So this is the thing, is that there's so many random solutions and ideas and systems that people are trying. The one you mentioned about like report somebody and then get feedback that they were actioned, I'm not privy to the data on that, whether that works, but my guess is that it's pretty successful, because many games do this now. I think Overwatch does this, Valorant, League, I think, does it, Dota does it, obviously. So I think that is good. But yeah, it's just like, the other thing also with Dota, recently they've added is something called Overwatch, which is essentially a system that's similar to the Tribunal that League had, which essentially what the players do is the players basically, it's kind of like a jury system where the players get see a report of some player who got actioned, and they judge whether it was legitimate or not. What this is really doing is it's training an algorithm for machine learning to eventually take over and not have the players have to do this. But I think I'm not sure how successful that was at Riot either, because they removed that system as well. I think a lot of it was just that the actions took too long, and I think it just kind of created this sort of environment where everyone's just talking about toxicity, and it's not kind of a good vibe. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with Overwatch.
Yeah, I forgot about the Tribunal. That was pretty interesting.
Oh, I definitely did not, because in the original iteration of the Tribunal, I mean, so here's the thing, is I think all of these mechanisms work only in as much as there is, kind of faith in the regulating body that is Riot, that is moderation, or in, the constitution of the community. Is this sort of overall a good place? If you already feel like League is kind of irredeemably toxic, then I think you're kind of primed to feel like the Tribunal is a bit of a joke. And I mean, I remember I would go on to Tribunal cases, and I'm outing myself here. I've had all sorts of toxic behavior over the years. I don't know where it comes from, but that's what I want to go and do next. But the Tribunal was great for just there's something. Look, we live in a culture where outrage and attention and shit posting and everything gets a lot of traction. And what the Tribunal really did was just collect the sort of best of the biggest jerks in the game and put them in a feed that you could just scroll through and read like it was a tabloid. I never read through it and felt like I'm some arbiter of player justice. I read through it and I was just like, dude, this guy's hilarious. Yeah, he's wrong, but it didn't make me not really want to do it as much. I think the mechanisms that keep the drama out of it, even if they have a little bit less nuance, are probably a bit more effective. But that's just me.
For a while, we talked about a system where the worst offenders in the game would actually be placed in stocks in Stormwind City, and so that everyone could see, and then you could buy tomatoes and throw them at them, and that kind of thing, right? But at the end of the day, we realized that people would be fighting tooth and nail to get into the stocks, right? That would be a reward for them, right? For the notoriety, so we decided against it. But yeah, I think a lot of the systems that are similar to that are as you would say, fraught with peril because of that. That's a type of celebrity and notoriety that some people actively seek.
Yeah, years later. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
I was going to change the topic, so you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, years later, people celebrate folks like that notorious rogue griefer that used to stalk the dogs. Was it Ennui or whatever? That guy that just, made everyone's life hell. They become legends over time, so, Anyway, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Oh, I was just going to ask, it might sound like a dumb question, but what do you think causes people in real life not to be toxic?
I was thinking about that.
At a concert or at work or at a grocery store, what is it that stops people from just throwing shit out of other people's carts or stealing it out of other people's carts, at a buffet? What do you think it is that would stop somebody from being the kind of toxic that people are online in real life?
Benefits or consequences, the same things that we all respond to, the carrot and the stick, right? Right. I think that it's actually rare. It's a more rare person that follows the rules inherently. I think most of us live in a world where we're still trying to get away with as much as possible before the rewards are limited or the punishments start racking up. We all drive a little bit over the speed limit. We all cheat on our taxes just a little bit, right? And so that's most of us are in.
The common answer would probably be well, you have this incredible veil of anonymity when you're on the internet, right? So you get to be whatever shitbag human you want to be. But I actually challenge that it is very easy to be anonymous in a crowd, at a grocery store in a town that you don't live in, or a porch pirate in a neighborhood that you don't live in. It's very easy to walk up to someone, slap them right in the fucking face, and never see a consequence for it one time in your life. You
Right.
can do
Never
that
done that?
so many
Okay.
times.
But I think the
So-
assumption is that there would be a consequence, right? So even if
Right,
in
but
reality it would be.
There's a fear that there is a consequence, but
Yeah.
I would say that consequence wouldn't even be a majority. Maybe it's a majority factor, but for the kind of people that would be toxic in real life,
Mm-hmm.
that's the consequence is not a factor to them. But there still are things that compel them not to slap random people in
Yeah.
public.
There's also the empathy element, which
Yep.
is
Yep.
missing from the internet exchange, because we assume that the person that we're attacking is an adult that can take it to some extent, and then we find out it was actually some 12-year-old kid who has developmental issues or something, and we've actually ruined him. Like how we would approach interactions with one versus the other in real life are totally different because of the just the empathy element.
I think that's a really great avenue to explore. I think both empathy and reputation.
Mm-hmm.
In a small community, you don't go around slapping people, right? Because you know that eventually they're going to all know who you are, and that you're going to be known as that guy that slaps people, and probably you'll go to jail.
Is this a bad time
Yeah.
to mention the rise of YouTube videos with the slap competitions?
What
And
was
how
that? Yeah,
they're-
there was like that thing where
Okay.
like you just punch someone randomly in the face. I forget what it was, but it was all over Vine or something. It was the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so empathy is an avenue, and reputation is another avenue. And I wonder if there is a way to emulate or expose those
Mhm.
things to people online. Like if you could give someone just a modicum of fucking empathy for their team
Right.
without revealing too much about who they are, because I think that kind of vulnerability needs to be earned and
Mhm.
reciprocal. But if you could like, I don't know if I've talked about this before, but I had this dumb idea from a fever dream once that like you could just see somebody's heart rate. You could see that they have a beating heart, and there's like a human behind that keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you say something like mean or something scary, you watch everybody's heart rate. Like at the end of the fight, you see that everyone's heart rate is fucking at 120 BPM. You're like, and you're vibing with these people. And you have this empathy for these people.
Mm.
Not to say like everyone should strap into a heart monitor whenever they play video games, but like in that vein of like understanding that there's a human behind the keyboard, I wonder if there is a space for exploration in games without being too revealing about who you are.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's really interesting. But don't some streamers, they have like that mod or something, right? That like
Mhm.
show their like heartbeat on
Oh,
the
yeah.
stream. But I'm thinking about that Candace, and I think there's probably gonna be some players who just fucking want to see that heart rate go up. So
Right.
like, let's see if I can give this guy a heart attack.
Right.
But I think you touched on something really important there, Candace, about, and this experience that you're talking about where people have empathy and vulnerability within a group, it has existed, and this is what's so great about MMOs and virtual worlds, right? It's like, in my guild, there's very little toxicity because everybody sort of knew each other. These are people that they're playing with all the time, that
Mhm.
they're talking to. I remember, for example, one story is that, this is like back when we were all teenagers playing WoW for the first time. There were some guys in the guild who, were using, sort of racist language, right? Because they were ignorant. They came from, exposed to a lot of minorities or whatever, right? They just thought
You don't need to make excuses for them. They're just
Yeah.
fucking assholes. It's fine.
Exactly. Well, sure, but what happened was, there's guys in my guild who were the ethnicities that they were being racist about, right? And so they just told them like, "Hey, dude, it's not cool," and they had a conversation, and they realized that they were being ignorant and they were being the things that they were saying were wrong, and they sort of changed themselves, and these two players became friends outside of the game later on, right? They met each other at BlizzCon and stuff like that, and that's how you get growth with people. It has to be, it takes time. Won't happen during a random match,
Right.
Totally, or a dungeon queue. Yep.
And everyone involved in that group was heavily invested, so the consequences of continuing down that road, like doubling down, is like, okay, you're going to be excluded, right? One of us is going to be excluded, and therefore the social structure is going to break down, and that matters a lot to people.
Well, and let's also talk about reputation, because and it's not just like your reputation on the server. Like back in the day of World of Warcraft and EverQuest, your reputation was everything, right? You couldn't change your name, you couldn't move your server. If you were a dick, then you didn't get to go into groups anymore.
Yeah.
You know, like you wouldn't get the best gear in the game anymore because nobody wants you in the group because you ninja looted. Like the worst thing you could do is, one, lie about being a woman for whatever reason, and two, ninja loot off of a corpse. Like those were the two biggest sins in EverQuest 1 that existed. But if you could do something like, and it's not just about the server reputation, it's also about like your local and in the moment reputation. For example, we've seen all those experiments of people that act like they're going to like, or they like start a tuffle, whatever, in public. A man looks like he's about to hit a woman, and they see how many people are about to intervene, right? Yep. What if you could do something like that in MMOs or in cooperative spaces where people that did bad things could have ramifications in the moment from other people, right? Like you don't punch the person who served you the wrong hamburger because A, like maybe you're not an asshole, but B, like if you started punching that guy, you don't know what other waiters are going to come out of that door and start like holding you down and calling the police.
Right.
Like I always wonder if there's like it would be good to show, and this is like a really bad example, but like if you could show somebody's like toxic points or something.
like it.
This person has a bad reputation.
The bat vision, and it shows it.
Be abused. Like in that simplistic form, of course, that would be abused. People would downvote people for no reason, basically, and there would be griefers. But like, if you could surrogate some sort of reputation, both the long-term reputation and a small community, but also like that in the moment being held accountable for your actions because people will step forward and stop you from being a dick. Like those are two other important elements on the 10-sided dice or whatever.
Yeah, we used to joke about those yell messages or zone-wide messages, but you also remember from EQ how you'd get those messages that people would say, let it be known, right, that so-and-so is a whatever, right? And obviously it was, if you break it down, sometimes it was mudslinging, but that was a thing that happened, and because it mattered, like reputation really matters. And so I think you're obviously in a really unique position, Candace, and what you're working on, but those will be interesting discussions for you, and like, why does reputation matter, and how does it matter? And I think obviously one of the big answers is the size of the communities, and how important that is to establishing that reputation matters, and also the services
now
you
that
offer.
Said that, I need to expose myself. I'm a Riot employee. I'm working on the new MMO. I am not representing Riot in any way, shape, or form. This is all my personal opinion. Keep going.
Yeah, sorry to call you out.
You're with the feds.
Cool.
Yeah,
you're with
feds.
The toxicity police.
Right. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting because like there's a cost to services that allow you to change your name and change your server and change your, like in terms of reputation. There's a cost to, allowing technology to dictate how many people end up on a server. And this goes back to my, Q rant about if we allow technology and, things to dictate design, then there can be consequences to that. Cross-server everything leads to nobody ever interacting with the same person twice, which has a negative, trickling effect on reputation and the way people treat each other, right? So design has to come back into it when determining some of these things.
Yeah, it's interesting, Candace, because you're kind of touching on like karma systems, essentially. Like people have reputations in the game that they're rated by other players, and they get certain rewards, or extrinsic or intrinsic from those karma points or whatever. And I pitched something for WoW at one point a long time ago. We never did it, but those are always sort of complicated too, because you can game them and then sort of like they sort of break down after that, right? But I'm always curious how like the post-mortem on those from other games have turned out. I'm not too familiar with a lot of other games and karma systems, if they actually work or what. But I also want to say we're halfway mark now through the show, so if anyone wants to come up, I know Zach wanted to come up and talk also, and we have Stoops here as well. I invited. He's always very opinionated on this sort of topic. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you up.
I also think that calling or talking about karma systems or harkening back to past karma systems is not effective because they weren't effective tools, but B, like there's also this notion, and I don't know where it comes from. I guess it was like when you were a kid and you're maybe like a boomer or a millennial or a Gen X or whatever, and the teachers would be like, I'm going to put that on your permanent record
Right.
whenever you fuck up. I don't think that it necessarily needs to be that permanent, like where you got downvoted by somebody and it needs to be so devastating to you because now that's going to be a permanent mark, and once you get to like 300 of them in your lifetime, which is like very different for someone who plays the game for 2 months or plays the game for 12 years, right? Like there's no one number fits all. That's why I think like there needs to be like 2 levels of the reputation system where like and they don't have the same solve. There's like the instant, immediate, someone has the chance to stand up for somebody else and they're incentivized to stand up for somebody else. And there's like a short-term consequence for being a fucking asshole whenever you're a fucking asshole. But then there's also like a long-term reputation system, or maybe it's not even a reputation system, it's just like the need to play with other people. And by like that virtue, you need to make friends and you can't repel people and you have to shower and you have to be nice.
So you're just saying organically rather than have a structured system.
Yeah, or some I'm not like a visionary here, but some blend of the two, where like there's more of an intrinsic desire to be around people, and you want to be around the people that you like, and you're not very often forced around the people that you don't fucking like. But then even if you are forced around the people that you don't like, you either have a reason to be nice to them, to be empathetic towards them, to care about their success, or you have a way to like stand up for the guy who's getting punched by the drunk guy behind the counter, you know?
Right.
Like all of those things. The answer is yes, it's all of it.
I do have to draw the line, and I think my chat agrees at showering, though. That's a bit rough. That's a bit demanding.
Sorry, that was like a very weird metaphor for like the things that you have to do in order to be socially accepted. Like you can't go to work and not shower, you know?
We haven't worked in all the same places, apparently.
Speaking of social spaces, let's talk about the shower, everybody. Hey.
But yeah, I would also want to say, and I absolutely hate doing this, because I frequently advocate for designers being ambitious and doing the hard work of coming up with solutions, but I would caution against relying too much on a perfectly designed, essentially legal system that responds programmatically to these issues, because you know if our real life legal systems are any indication, these things get so complex so fast and require so much human interaction to properly legislate, and that coming up with a system is a monumental effort in terms of design.
And it also implies that there's only one moral right, which is also not how humans operate.
And it's also just another system that we gamers are going to be good at min-maxing. Anything that gives power to players to manipulate, we're going to do that.
This is very much shades of last week, right? In terms of design trying to steer culture.
Yeah.
In one way or another.
Yeah, we're going to fix the legal system next week. So.
Yeah, kill me.
That's right.
We have Zach up on stage, just so that you're not sitting up there feeling awkward. Welcome.
No, thanks,
what was
man.
on your mind?
So I have like a couple things. As a former, maybe slightly reformed, incredibly toxic person in terms of gaming. Luca was well privileged to that for like 15 years.
Yes.
Hi,
I only
Zach.
observe. Yeah, I don't indemnify.
So one of the things you guys touched on that I thought was really interesting, and not to like put the Tribunal or Riot or League of Legends or Dota in particular on blast for it, is Kevin, you mentioned the sort of the carrot and the stick, right? And in games like I mean one of the most famous examples is Tyler 1, right? When a game is free, the penalty, especially, I mean, yes, you can lose cosmetics, but when the game is essentially free and the only thing you've potentially lost is 20 or 30 hours of a game you like to play, maybe more, you know, it probably depends. But the cost is just not there. The punishment does not exist, especially in cases where you get some level of notoriety from it.
Right.
And one of my favorite ones in terms of something that in terms of toxicity is, I think, defining the toxicity. There's a really easy line with you know, misogynistic stuff and racism and, you know, all the things that you can look at and be like, yeah, no, that's stupid, right? Like, there's no question. So I grew up playing Ultima Online when I was like 12, 13, and sneaking downstairs at 10 o'clock.
Welcome, brother.
Stuffing blankets behind my modem so you couldn't hear the sound dial up and wake up my parents. But I remember one of the most toxic things, which I probably wouldn't classify as toxic now, happening to me was that I saved up, I don't know how much money from like skinning sheep, or I guess shearing sheep, and to buy like my first house. And the dude's like, yeah, no, I'll sell you one, like $15K, and like we'll port through here and go there. First thing that happens, port through. He's like, oh yeah, let me switch you over. Immediately get ganked, die, lose all my money that I spent like nights and nights and nights staying up for, and I was just like raging, you know, like impotent 12-year-old rage. But then you get to see that evolve, and I don't know if you remember Galad the Looter, but there was this guy who basically went around. He was incredibly toxic in a sense because he would just constantly sneak into people's houses. But those are the systems of the game. So in cases like that, like how do you just accept a certain level of toxicity, like maybe gameplay toxicity extending into like, I don't know, everybody, you know, there's a crouch, any game there's a crouch or teabagging someone, right?
Right.
In terms of an FPS, but like how do you propose that you solve those problems, or are they just you design for the toxicity rather than against it? Or is there like a difference between creative toxicity that is like more convolutional than it is straight up just being a dick?
Is this a case of like moving goalposts? Like the difference between what might now or what should just be called maybe consequences being labeled toxicity? Like, because when you talk about this shit, it was you know, it could happen to you in Ultima Online, but that was sort of part of the contract of playing, and it's the sort of stuff that like people recall really fondly. But of course now, you know, even opening it up for that kind of shit to happen is like, you know, courting toxicity in a way, some people might say. So I don't know where that line is. I'd be interested to hear what y'all think.
And that's definitely part of the design, right? Like, and if you look at it from far enough away, like remove yourself from the emotional experience of your 12-year-old self at the time, you know, was that experience not something you've taken with you throughout your entire life that you look back on and go, wow, that was really an experience. I learned from it. I had an emotional experience that I've also grown from, you know, like, was that not part of the design intent of Ultima Online, was to have people experience real things, real emotions, real loss, real rage, real vindication in some cases, you know? And I think that was one of the strengths of that experience, and the strengths of that game was that it did allow for those things to occur. But a lot of people would say, no, that's just toxic and horrible and should be left out of games entirely. So everyone's kind of line on what is toxic is also very different.
Yeah, I mean, the social norms and sensitivities have drastically changed, like in the last 10, 15 years. I touched on this in the article too, because, you know, Microsoft used to advertise, they would like, you know, talk about like, oh, if you play this game, you noobs and stuff like that, or like, they would just basically kind of tease like toxicity in the advertising, because back then it was just part of like accepted that's part of the game, that's part of the appeal, right? But today it's very different.
Shadowbane's old marketing line, we do not bake bread. That was like a specific shot of like, we're too hardcore to be stupid Care Bear crafters, like just really weird.
And then 2020 comes and everybody's baking bread and they feel like badasses for it.
That's right. My bread is the best in the biz.
Enough. Stoops, Oliver, I'm suspecting you're Stoops from checking out your profile. Did you have something to contribute?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. You guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I just was listening to you guys and I found it pretty interesting. I know Chris said that I'm not sure what you said, something about a big advocate for, or I feel pretty passionately about this stuff. But I did read your article. I thought it was really well written and I enjoyed a lot of it because it did open up my eyes to some of the issues with matchmaking systems, because I come from a World of Warcraft background where we really don't have a matchmaking system at all. And I feel all the side effects of that, just really difficult to find games, not able to play as often as I would like. And it becomes a bit discouraging at sometimes because, sometimes I really like World of Warcraft as a game, but I can't play whenever I want to play.
Right.
And that is sometimes pretty discouraging. But I do think one thing, maybe you guys touched on, I know you guys talked a lot about how, what companies can do to minimize toxicity and things that systems that they can put into place, tribunal systems, things like that. But I do also think just the gameplay itself is pretty contributing to that too. Like for League of Legends, there's no doubt that it's a frustrating experience because you're in that match for maybe 20 to 30 minutes. And, maybe you're doing really well top lane, but then your bot lane keeps feeding and then they die and they come back and they keep feeding it. It makes your job infinitely harder to win the game. So I think sometimes gameplay and the design of the game itself can contribute to that outside of just what you can do as a company, but just the experience of the game. Sometimes shorter matches, like I know for, when compared to Arena in World of Warcraft, it's very short, 2 to 5 minute matches, hopefully. It's not much time to become toxic or get frustrated. The game's too short. But if you look at like an RPG or a battleground scenario where those matches go on for quite a while, you have this downtime to start typing in chat and saying like, this is so frustrating, what are you doing, and sometimes objective gameplay as well, like that type of gameplay can even be more to it because it's kind of easier to follow. So I do think sometimes the game itself can contribute to that, just how the game is designed. So I think some games just have it way worse no matter what you do, just because it's a long experience, a grueling experience. And I know in Heroes of the Storm, I remember at BlizzCon, I don't know if they put it into the game, but they said something about how they try to reward you based on your own performance. Like you would go up in rating if you did really well. I'm not sure if they ever put that into place or if that's still in the game, but I thought that was a good way of trying to deal with the MOBA toxicity, because that game's so team focused. You can't really carry too much in that game.
Yeah, I think they flirted with it, but systems where you reward based on performance are always challenging because players game them. Like, for example, Overwatch had this for a while. I don't even know if it was like public to the player, but for example, players quickly realized if you resurrect players, it increases your basically MMR or whatever behind the scenes. And so players would just let players die and then res them to increase their MMR, let's say, right? Because it was a good faith gesture by the developers. They wanted to like reward the player at a different vector rather than just win-loss and based on their performance, but the players gamed it because they realized what raises their MMR, right? And so we talk about the same things in WoW. It's like, well, we can reward players based on how many flags they cap or how many flags they return, but then players would be like fighting over the flag because and then that became the game, right? Rather than winning. And so these things are always really challenging to implement, but they always come from a good place. I think one issue with, like, you're talking about Haas and League, in League, one of the differences, I guess it's a spectrum you can think about. In Dota, for example, the game really rewards the individual player a lot more. You can carry in Dota pretty easily. you can get like the best items. You can have a high level differential between your team. Like you can be several levels higher, right? There's a concept of a carry, right? In HOTS, that was something they intentionally wanted to get rid of because they felt that caused toxicity when a player had a high, did more damage than the rest of the team and things like that, right? But in actuality, in post-mortem of that, it actually made the game more toxic because players, you relied on your team more. Everybody had to be at the same spot at once to team fight, and if you weren't, you're going to get trucked, right? Where in Dota, if you had more impact, more agency as a player to turn the tide as an individual player. So it created less animosity between individual players. So I always thought that was really interesting. I kind of think League kind of in the middle-ish there, but yeah.
Do you really think that was the case? I mean, I've played all the MOBAs and eventually landing on HOTS, and I remember finding, as Stoops was saying, you know, the game's just engineered in a way that it's like much more difficult to feel really frustrated by toxicity or anything, and that's not because there is no toxicity. I think it's actually just because like the stakes are so much lower. Like I would get out of a 15-20 minute HOTS game and not really be too bothered by it because it was only 15 to 20 minutes. So that doesn't really say that like their anti-toxicity systems were working, because it might just be that the games are that short that you don't care. But I mean, I don't know. I think you can kind of argue either side on that. I do think that they probably did work to a degree. I don't feel like, and even HOTS has sort of asymmetries within it where they've got a couple of heroes that do sort of infinitely scale. Zach plays the Butcher, and he's basically like the sort of honeypot in there for all toxic Dota 2 characters that want to, you know, play a character that can keep building their strength infinitely and eventually handle the game by themselves. And that character has consequences when he dies too, and losing all of it. And it feels like a mini Dota 2, you know, experience encapsulated in this one hero's design. So I think there are rough edges in each of them, but overall, I don't know. I found HOTS to be a much more relaxing experience. Because it like
I will
didn't
say,
waste as much of my time if things went badly, you know.
I will say that it's funny that, and because I put a lot of thought into this kind of stuff as relates to MOBAs. MOBAs are pretty notorious for having toxic communities, right, compared to other genres. You could certainly bring in like Call of Duty or first-person shooters, but I think MOBAs have that thing in common. And one of the things I've thought about is the game design and what leads to some of it. And I think it's I think one of the reasons why toxicity is so prevalent is because of how unintuitive some of the metrics for success in MOBAs are. There's a lot of really obfuscated mechanics in the game that don't make sense to new players, and the reasons for those are too difficult to have a quick conversation about. Like, it would be one thing if like a player was playing badly and you could just say, dude, just go get this one item and you'll be 10 times better, and they go, okay, let me go get that item, and then they find their performance is improved, right? But like explaining why you don't want to push down a tower too quickly in a game where that's the objective, is to destroy towers and the Nexus, right, to a new player, is like this long conversation, right? It's like, well, because you want to make sure the creeps are coming in a safe place where you can maximize, you know, the value of beating your lane opponent for as long as possible so you can snowball towards the mid to late game. You know, like the concepts there are so bewildering to a new player who's just like, well, the objective is to destroy the tower, right, in my lane, so that I can move to the next one and then destroy the Nexus. Or my buddy's in trouble, I should go help him. And it's like, no, that's the opposite of what you should do, because you're just going to feed them a second kill because he's already dead, so just write him off. Don't give them 2 kills where you could have just given them 1, right? But our natural inclination is, oh, I should just go help my buddy. You know, that'll be better for everybody. But yeah, like having these conversations is so difficult, and Candace touched on this earlier. It's much easier to just say, God, you suck so badly, I hate you, right? Why are you such a noob? And then that's what happens, right, when people, you know, play badly, and they have to like somehow figure out in this weird, mysterious game how to play effectively when it goes against basic intuition, and that comes down to the game design. And MOBAs are amazing, but the side effect is they have a lot of unintuitive game design mechanics in terms of how you get better. And so that leads to, MOBAs being, I think, one of the notoriously toxic genres.
No, I think that's a really good point. And what I was thinking about when you're talking is, WoW also has an issue with this sometimes with dungeons. A lot of times players don't understand why the group wiped, and they think it's like the healer, and so everyone blames the healer, because obviously if we died, it's probably the healer's fault. They're intended to keep us alive. But a lot of times, it's not the healer's fault. It's kind of the design is that if you didn't move out of the mechanic, you didn't move out of the fire or whatever, the player, that's why you died, right? But it's not very in the player's face, right?
Yeah.
And it's not very intuitive that it's that's the reason why we wiped, or is it because the healer or tank screwed up? So understanding the reasons for why we wiped is always not very clear, and there's always ways the game could be better at telling the player that. So,
yeah. And sometimes it's clear. It's like, you pulled too much, but sometimes it's less clear. Like, well, if the DPS had focused down one mob instead of trying to AoE everything down, then the tank wouldn't have been under so much pressure, and the healer would have survived. So sometimes it gets really complex. But I think game design can do a lot of work in trying to make things, the path to getting better, more intuitive, or more in line with what you would expect to happen. Like, people are presented with a problem and then they respond to it, and a lot of times game designers can predict how they're going to respond to it because of obvious clues or whatever. And then does that response play into the path of getting better, or does it make them actually play worse, or get further away from the actual true objective, like in the downing a tower too quickly in a MOBA scenario?
I wanted to...
Oh, I'm sorry, Stoops, go for it.
No, I just wanted to add one more thing. I think it was you that had talked about it as well. Like, once I think you said it about League, how it already has that label of being toxic, and, it's hard to get rid of that stigma. I wonder how other games have it. Like, I know I've been playing a lot of TFT, which is Teamfight Tactics. It's like within the League of Legends client, and I love that game because it's just me. It's just me. We're in a lobby, but if I lose, I might be mad at the RNG, or if I played poorly. I think Chris touched on it in his article talking about that maybe those games aren't as attractive to people because it's a little bit more intimidating because it is all on you. You can't maybe subconsciously, you can't blame your teammates. But I feel like Battle Royale is kind of have it a little bit better because you can do duos or random duos, but you can also just go in solo and it's just you. But then on the other end of the spectrum, I know in Warzone, for example, for some reason when you die, you have a couple seconds to talk shit to your opponents. So you die, and then you have this 3-second window where you can say "fuck you" as you die, and then they can hear that, laugh at you. So I don't know why they added that feature in the Toxicity voice as you're dying, but I guess
I love that. I love that feature.
Right.
Yeah,
we toyed with that same thing for the undead class in WoW. We considered allowing them to still speak common so that they could be the shit talker race in PvP, right? No one else could communicate across faction, but they could. So we thought that would attract a certain element, but it was something I was in favor of. But ultimately, we were like, probably not a good idea.
Since we're kind of rounding 7 o'clock here, I wanted to try to end it on maybe a more positive note. I have 2 questions, but Chris's whole article is about how this war is sort of going to fail, and it obviously provides, some suggestions for how game design can steer it. So we've been talking about, but anecdotally, do any of y'all have experiences of communities? And I mean communities that have, I guess, some of the same presumptions as playing World of Warcraft, playing any of these where you have folks that are anonymized, either competing or collaborating together, that you've experienced community reform within. Like, have you seen it done? Because I'm wondering if the reform is possible, or if it's really like you have to kind of start as you mean to go on, and you need to just really set a strong example off the bat. I'd just be interested to see if you all had experiences of things working out, or over that long term.
Yeah, Ultima Online, absolutely. Yeah, I talk about a lot how the growth and development of communities in that game actually track humanity's kind of growth and humanity's through the ages, right? Like, it started out with everyone was friendly. We were all happy collecting resources. Then the resources ran out, and everybody slowly realized that to continue gathering resources, we had to fight each other. So everyone started killing each other and taking their stuff. And then, sides were drawn, and small groups of really aggressive people were started ruling, and then communities formed, to have strength in numbers to avoid these wandering packs of PKs. And so actual communities formed up with lots of people that, with systems in place where you don't do these things. And so like internal laws were made. Like, stop me when this sounds familiar, right? But I've seen like the whole process. It's actually a fascinating game to research as a sociologist. Over time you do see in like an open-ended environment lots of growth and things that can occur if people are given the time. But I think I don't think a lot of games and game design and companies give it the time to mature and grow. I think our more typical response is very knee-jerk and trying to eliminate those problems at the root as soon as we find them, rather than allowing things to grow and mature. So it's a tough thing to actually pull off in a game.
I have another one, and this isn't an indictment on the game, but my theory is that when the player resource is scarce, the players value each other more.
Yeah.
And so when I go back to play EverQuest 2, they have like a tool. When you do dungeons, they have a tool that lets you backfill. So like you have to make a group, you have to go in, but then there's an automatic backfill button. But that will take like minutes or hours to get a human because of various reasons of the game. Like the people are incentivized to do old content, the people are fractured amongst, 85 billion different levels, like whatever reason. Whenever you're doing like the random level 35 dungeon for unique or whatever, you don't have enough people to do it. And so when someone actually gets backfilled, you're so thankful that there is a human at all to be there.
Right.
And that you're invested in their success. And the other thing that blew my mind about the EverQuest 2 community is that they're nice. You get into the dungeon, everyone's like, hey, what's everybody fucking up to? Get on voice chat, get in here. And so you get on the voice chat and often, this also isn't an indictment on anybody, but often they have a southern accent and they're very pleasant. and they're it's like expected that you'll get on voice chat and you'll just chill with these people. Yeah. And that was the most inclusive environment I think I've ever been in an MMO, and it was so dope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot more similar to the original vanilla.
Friends. I immediately was invited, because we had such a good time, they were like, you can join our guild if you want to, and then but then it happened again, and then it happened again. I kept going through these dungeons, and these people are being nice to each other and chatting with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that vanilla, the old school vanilla experience of it took an hour to form, the dungeon group, and so people hold on to it for dear life, and they're much more likely to be supportive and, walk you through if you're doing things wrong or, whatever it is, because they're invested. They want the community thing to succeed for multiple reasons. One is just, social experience that's more positive, but it's also because the reward structure is based around the social structure working. Like, the social thing is the limiting factor. It's the scarcer thing, right? So that's the hardest thing to achieve. Even more so in forming a raid guild, right? And reputation really matters, and people really invested in it, and they want it to work so that the rest of the game can be played. Now it's backwards. It's the other way around. There's millions of people waiting to fill each slot, so we select you based on your performance ability rather than your social qualities.
So every game needs to be like Animal Crossing, where like you only have a couple of friends that they give you, but then you can like go make more friends and collect them on your little island.
Right.
Nailed it. You're welcome, everybody. I solved player toxicity.
I mean, I
Well
think
done.
a key thing you said there, Candace, basically is scarcity and basically interdependence between people. If people depend on other people, they're not going to be dicks to them, right? Like if there's only X healers on your server who are good, or mages who are willing to give you food, or whatever it is, then you're just not going to be dicks to them, right? And if you just don't have disposable people where, if this group doesn't work out, well, fuck it, there's some other group a queue away, then you're not going to get the sort of you're going to get a better kind of social experience, I think. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. And it's just like a lot of these things are just come from design, right? They don't come from what is the best way to get rid of toxic people, or what's wrong with these sort of people, right? It's just a lot of it just comes from the game side.
Yeah. So the design isn't being worked on enough, and then the solutions are also, people are striving to come up with automated solutions that fix all these problems. And so I think the failures are on both ends of the problem.
I think personally for me, one of the most rewarding communities I've been with, that where I came from UO and then and saw that and what that had to offer. But when Dark Age of Camelot came out, and you played any type of support class, a bard especially, or like a thane, and you had your common enemy, which was typically one or both of the other factions in RVR, people were so much more welcoming, and they really went out of their way to help you with either your spells, your rotation, your positioning, especially when you got into those big RVR battles. It's nice you guys played that, where there was 50 or 100, 150 people on the screen trying to all accomplish the same thing. So having that common goal and having some type of common goal, which I guess goes back to what you guys were talking about before about having that interdependence on each other to achieve. Now, obviously, you were toxic to the other realms. That goes without saying. But with each other, you were great.
That's intended. That's culture there.
Yeah.
That's right.
Or First Alliance, baby.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's okay to be racist in video games? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what we've been trained to
I think
do
we're
the
about
whole
done.
We did it. Let's not undo it.
I wanted to give Stoops the last word. Stoops, did you have another question? Did you want to talk about anything else?
I mean, no. I thought it was really interesting to listen to, just because, again, I'm always on the player side of things, and I know you guys obviously are playing games too. But I really do. I think I talked to you about it earlier. It does feel like the car example that cars are great. They help you get around faster. They make things way more convenient. I feel like they're a necessity for a lot of people, but there's obviously consequences behind these systems. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done there to improve upon that, and I'm interested just to see where things are in a couple of years with matchmaking, because I do think toxicity is probably, not just in video games, but everywhere online, is probably at an all-time high. So, yeah,
and I think it's really interesting. A good capstone too is like, so I wrote it in the article, and it's it's historically accurate that Bungie basically really spearheaded matchmaking in a big way in Halo 2 on Xbox Live. And it's interesting that Bungie has changed now with Destiny 2. Not have solo queue matchmaking for the raids in Destiny 2, and it's something they specifically have said they're not going to do. And the reason why, I mean, it's kind of obvious that they feel like they don't want to get people who are strangers in the group. And so their solution, which I always thought was interesting, is that you need to have someone has to host the group, like a guild or a group, and then you can like add other randoms to it. So you have to have kind of like a pre-made group to seed it.
Interesting.
And I always thought that was a really interesting way to do it, because you have someone hosting it, you have like someone who with accountability, and you have a leader basically, right?
Yeah.
And
you also have a majority
interesting.
social, like, foundation.
Yeah. And I always thought, romantically, you could imagine maybe some people join that guild, right? Like, who were pugs. but I don't know how that's turned out. I don't play Destiny 2 that much, but I'm always curious about that solution because I always thought that was really smart.
Yeah.
But regardless, I've noticed like so many people still keep requesting solo queue
for sure,
matchmaking for the raid, so it's something
they just want to get it done.
Unavoidable. yeah.
Well, I have one more thought, but it's a whole rabbit hole. I don't know if anyone wants to feel this, but I wonder about the alternate universe where Blizzard did end up forcing Real ID into all of their systems.
Oh, it's so funny. I almost brought that up when Candace was talking, because I could see like a line of thought that did lead somebody to Real ID. And yeah, obviously it went down terribly in the community, and I was opposed to it as well. And I still am. But yeah, I just don't think the costs are worth
I agree.
the benefits, right? So, yeah.
I think it might have had the desired effect over the long term, but it would have been like a Thanos snap, It would have taken it would have taken things back to such a baseline that what rebuilt would have been a very different feeling community.
Yeah.
Clearly nobody wanted to suffer it, right?
What do you mean by Real ID? The implementation of Real ID, like just BattleNet, like friends list, or just
No.
Yeah, there was a point several years ago, probably even like a decade ago now, where Blizzard was getting ready to force people to use their real life handles on forums and such, and you would be able to see who people were, even in World of Warcraft and such. Yeah.
Yeah, Stoops was probably like in elementary school back then.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think people's identities are more worth protecting because of all the risks out there. So,
I think it was 14 or 15.
I'm a little cavalier with Real ID because if you play Overwatch and someone friends you to talk trash after the game, I usually just instantly request Real ID with them right after.
yeah, that's right.
I want to know how committed they are to insulting me.
That's right.
Boss up. There you go.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Isn't it interesting that that's kind of like an implied threat, right? That now that I know your real name,
That's right.
now aren't you in a fucking world of trouble?
That's
and
right.
I think that's why just like even the implied actual violence that will ever happen to you is completely unacceptable, and that's why that won't work.
Mm-hmm.
It could never be.
Yeah, it only takes one case of two players getting together and one murdering another,
Yeah.
and it's suddenly on the company, right?
For what it's worth on the forums, most people, for at least WoW, they use a level 1 character. They don't use a real character because they don't want to, deal with all of the backlash that comes behind it.
Yep.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole thesis was just that if you take the hood off every player and expose who they really are, they're going to be nice to each other.
Right.
Which I'm very skeptical of that, because if you've ever been on Facebook and saw some people rage at each other with their real names or or all of that, it doesn't really ensure that no one's going to be a dick,
Right.
even just if their real name is attached, right?
There's a million side effects.
It happens on LinkedIn. There's like LinkedIn wars that go on, and I have no idea how people do that.
Oh my God.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd suspect they would reduce it an amount, but I don't know how much. And then there's also side effects as well. It's like someone could be fished or whatever. I don't know. But
is this like calling in sick when your boss has your Twitter account and then you post all your pics at Disneyland and?
Yeah. But all right. Cool.
I think it probably more ends up meaning. Let's take it out. So Clubhouse number 7. This is a great one, and we will see you all next Wednesday, same time, same place.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys.
Well, thanks everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Y'all are amazing.
Bye.
Yeah,
Don't be
bye-bye.
toxic.
Thank you.
Somebody's got to be toxic. All right, I'll do it. All right, thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to gently massage that like button. Don't smash it. Don't smash it. It's sensitive. Just gently massage. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.